Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry about the delay at starting the hearing, but it is now begun. It is the Wednesday, December 5th Conservation Commission agenda. Tonight, we have a joint meeting with the Community Preservation Committee presentation and discussion of conceptual restoration master plan for Spring Bars Road. One moment. Jen, you have anything before they? Please. Just to instruct the audience, anybody who does make comment tonight, public comment, please go up to the podium and so that we can hear you on the microphone. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ken Buckland. I'm the clerk of the Community Preservation Committee and chairman of the Spring Bars Road Subcommittee, which has been involved in the planning for the conservation area on the Spring Bars Road parcel. Tonight we have a good representation of the Community Preservation Committee, both past and present members as well too. So you might want to raise your hand as to show that our representation. We also have Deb Converse. And Barbara, you have to raise your hand too, because I said past members as well. And Mike, thank you very much. This is an important juncture, I think, in the planning for the Spring Bars Road parcel. As you know, it was divided into a housing piece and a conservation area. And this is our opportunity to define what we want for the conservation side of it. We're in the midst of going through the process of developing the request for proposals for the housing side of it, and in the process of doing that, it's now with the Board of Selectmen and part of a broader planning effort within the region, or the neighborhood being developed by the Cape Cod Commission. So we'll see probably the results of that, but this is where we lead the effort in saying what we want for the conservation side of the parcel and what we'd like to see in terms of a community plan. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Horsley Witten Group, which has been our consultant on this and come up with what we think is a great plan and a great point of discussion about what we could do as a community to improve the property. And with us tonight is Amy Ball, representing as the project manager for the Horsley Witten Group, and I'll turn it over to you now at this point, so you can go through the slides and give us an outline of the presentation of the ideas. Thank you.
Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Dim the lights a little bit. There we go. Okay, so as Ken mentioned, this is one of the important junctures of the master planning process. The town has had some input from the public as to the aspects and the components of the conservation land, what they'd like to see there. Some of it happened prior to Horsley Witten's involvement. We had our first public meeting back in July. There was another meeting last week. And so now we are here because it's a cooperative effort with conservation, with the 300 committee, and Jessica's here, and the CPC. We would need to have your input. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, the site location, it's right in along the northwest corner of Little Pond, just south of the mall. And as Ken mentioned, there are two parcels involved with the larger piece. Our focus is on the turquoise outlined or blue outlined parcel, which is the conservation land. Horsley Witten first went out. We did a site visit. We identified some of the site features, which I'll have Hannah Carlson talk about in a minute. But one of the things the Conservation Commission needs to be well aware of, if you are not, is that nearly the entire 9-acre parcel falls within conservation jurisdiction of one or another. You have Little Pond here to the east of the parcel. Little Pond has its associated bordering vegetative wetland. It also has riverfront area associated with it that extends 200 feet into the parcel, parallel to the mean annual high water. It also has a vernal pool and a globally rare Atlantic white cedar swamp on it. And nearly the entire parcel is also falling within the 100-year floodplain, with the exception of a small area up near Spring Bars Road, and this sort of teardrop area right in the center of the parcel. So as I said, we went out, then we did a site visit, and that generated a site analysis map. Hannah, I'm going to have you talk about it, but what we really did was we found certain aspects, existing aspects of the parcel that either would need to be featured, perhaps, or somehow managed so that this parcel will end up being a conservation parcel.
And this is just, all right. So, hello, I'm Hannah Carlson, landscape designer at Horsley Witten. And as Amy said, this was our site analysis map that is born out of field observations with GPS mapped points, paths, and areas that you can see called out in the plan. Those consist of the lines are really the existing access and circulation locations and conditions. The larger kind of green and yellowish zones are organized by vegetation, topography, and historical uses. The points of interest were unique features of the site, and there were also view sheds that aren't shown on this map, but that are of either desirable or perhaps undesirable views. And after we did this, the field work and the site analysis map and mapping of the environmental conditions, we had our first public meeting where we further identified opportunities and elements and kind of solidified at that point the direction of the master plan. So let's see. One of our next steps was to identify similar sites as kind of a precedent analysis. And we went to these 4 sites, 3 of which are close by in Falmouth, and Mashpee, Ashuman Holly, Quashnet River area, Bartolome Conservation Area, and then the Atlantic White Cedar Swamp out in Wellfleet. And we picked these areas really because they're similar natural resources. They have similar natural resources and features, even unique features like the Atlantic White Cedar Swamp. And these similar sites really help to inform us on the users that would go to these places, the uses of the different sites, how the different sites handled and protected the features, and also the amenities that were typical to those places. So in developing the master plan, we broke it down into a series of layers. There's a vegetation and habitat restoration layer, access, site elements, and the scenic resource areas. And now I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit more detail. This is kind of a shortened version of the slideshow, but I hope to explain it as thoroughly as possible in a short amount of time as possible. So the restoration layer is broken into 4 categories: active restoration, passive restoration, limited disturbance, and then a 50-foot property buffer. The active restoration layer is really about using specific remedial actions like rebuilding healthy soils or planting desirable species on the site. The active restoration layer has these various ecological community compositions that you can see underneath: meadow, edge, woodland, riparian buffer, and a butter buffer. The passive restoration layer is really about stopping activities that cause degradation to the land, allowing natural processes of succession to reestablish communities, plant communities. And it would also be monitored areas, and uses of those areas would be managed. The limited disturbance areas are really more protected areas, where you might see more of like stay on the trail signs. They would not have active management beyond really maintenance of the trails and signage. and things like hydrologic processes would be maintained. The additional buffer, which is the dashed line that's going around the property line, extends 50 feet beyond the property line, and it's really our recommendation that to minimize disturbance to the existing hydrology on the parcel that is the conservation land, and to provide screening so that there's really the function and the feeling of the conservation land is maintained. Especially in that area, it's important to do this, especially in the area where there's very kind of small widths, of the conservation land. So to be able to kind of maintain the feeling that you're really in that conservation space. And this would, a suggestion of the 50-foot buffer would be potentially incorporated as part of our master plan report as like performance standard recommendations for the adjacent development. The access layer has both existing and enhanced and new circulation paths on site. So the existing and enhanced are in red and the new are in orange. There's a 10-foot wide path, which is made up mostly of the existing road and then also the new road. It's more of a path. It wouldn't be a road except that it is 10 feet wide to allow accessibility for emergency vehicles. And there'd be a 6-foot wide path that's really just the existing path that you can see down over by where the lake is, Little Pond. Oh yeah, I have a pointer. So that's over here. There's a 5-foot wide path, which is both the existing as well as a new path to potentially create a secondary loop down here. That wouldn't necessarily be ADA compliant due to the topographic changes in this area of the site. There would also be 3-foot wide paths that are generally existing that we identified on site with the potential of having a new one to access the conservation land to the northern area of the site. There'd also be improvement of the existing steps that are here, larger, safer, potentially ADA compliant ramps depending on, again, topographic changes and space. There's also 2 areas identified for potential boardwalks, which could either be additional routes around the site or alternative routes. This one down on the bottom left here would potentially be an alternative route to the path that would go up and over the spillway from the swamp into kind of the vernal pool area, or it would be an additional path. And then there's this other one here that would be alongside the pond. And we wanted to incorporate these into the plan for discussion, but also they're there to really allow potential users to bring them closer to the unique features of this particular parcel, potentially foster stewardship that way. And then there's the parking lot, which is shown here on the existing disturbed area of the site, and it would be a crushed stone or pervious material. Oops. So the site elements layer discusses structures, site amenities, and signage on site. And this really isn't about choosing specific designs for these various things, but really coming up with the elements that we feel fit into the context of the conservation land. So the structures on site would be a kiosk up here by the parking lot, kayak launch where there is an existing, if you can call it a kayak launch, but it's water access that's currently there. A covered shelter That would really be, something very simple, potentially with seating or interpretive signage, more, for, very simple, for like naturalists, you could bird from it. There would be, if you created a path down here, there would need to be a bridge here over the spillway. And then, of course, the boardwalks would also be structures that would both help people circulate around the site, but then also provide draw to come to the site. Amenities include formal seating, which would be benches, basically, which could be found potentially in the covered shelter. Informal seating the idea is more like stones or even large logs that you could sit on, but that just aren't formally, called seating. Receptacles potentially up here by the parking lot, which we see as being very minimal to the site. It would really be more of a carry-in, carry-out kind of site, being conservation land. And the existing osprey nest here on the site, and the community gardens. We right now, of course, a point of discussion that we'll touch on again later. We put here by the parking lot, which is outside of the flood zone and close to vehicular access. Signage on the site is kind of dotted around with the informational signage being up front, and then directional signage and interpretive, both large and small, being placed around the site. And then the last layer of the master plan is the scenic resources layer. So these are view sheds that we've identified as ones that you would want to maintain for various reasons. So the first one up here would be a view across this meadow area, which would be the more active restoration area, and that would focus on the osprey nest. This triangular view here would be, and is partially an existing view now, is of Little Pond, so maximizing that view. And down here is another opportunity to maintain the view shed of existing kind of open space, and this would be in the more passive restoration area. You get that view of meadow and edge habitat, another good place where you might find unique species and birds, things like that. And that, this is the map, right? This is the master plan with all the layers on top of each other, so you can see how they interact with one another. And we'll put that up as we talk about the points of discussion. And the next couple of slides are ones that we put together to talk to the public about, to get feedback on, and of course we can talk about them at this time and any other topics you'd like to bring up. But I'll just go through these maybe quickly, and then we can go back to them and talk to them as needed. So the boardwalk routes you can see are up in the two areas that I previously identified. So here along Little Pond and here around the Cedar Swamp. The path accessing, which doesn't exist currently, the path accessing the property to the north would be here. Covered shelter here, same location as the kayak launch. And then the community garden. So these are all items that we felt like are good topics to get feedback on, both from the public and as well as you. And I guess I'll turn that back over to you with any questions. Or also, we have the extended slideshow with us too. So if you have any questions of how we came to these layers, or if you want us to go into any more detail, please, we'd be happy to answer or explain.
For the benefit of the viewers at home, Tom, if you could turn some lights back on, and if we need to review a slide, we can maybe turn some lights down again. You want to hit the bottom row as well, Tom? Thank you. Jen, do you have any comments at this time?
No, at this time, I'll let the board
Okay,
follow up with.
all right. I'm going to start with Courtney. Do you have any?
I realize that there is a conservation restriction on this lot, and so that's fine, but I'm looking at the parcels map, which is, go back to the beginning of the slides. And I realize that we have a dual purpose on this property. One is to, and I'm talking about this property, meaning the whole parcel, the two parcels together. One is to develop affordable housing, and the other is to create a recreational thing. And I realize that the conservation restriction applies to this parcel. But in reality, in looking at the parcels map, this whole thing's sort of artificial in my mind, because from a geological standpoint, from a resource area standpoint, from all of those things, these boundaries that you have are very artificial. And I realize that the green plot that you have here is governed by a conservation restriction. It seems to me that there should be a large view development plan here that clarifies what's going on, and there's no reason in my mind. You've got this what appears to be a large bite, because the parcel, I mean, you've got this void in the middle, and in fact, the existing roads run through there. They cross over these parcels because these parcels were combined and had a single use. So I realize that there's been a lot of work on a conservation restriction already, but from a personal standpoint, and looking at this now and seeing the large picture, I'd like to see this whole thing, the whole parcel, more clearly defined as to what uses are going to be applied to what. And if you're going to have recreational uses, then it should include this bite area, because you're near resource areas.
Well, maybe I can start on this one.
Good.
We were talking about two different parcels of land. The fact is, there is a relationship between the two because they're both under control by the town. But we have a development parcel that what we want to go through is a process that will allow a development proposal to come to the town that best represents what we see is in terms of performance.
And I understand that. It's just that I'm looking at this and it just strikes me that this is awfully artificial, that's all.
And a lot of subdivisions are artificial.
No, I understand.
Where you put lot lines is where you get your jurisdiction. This is an interesting one, though, and part of that discussion about this idea of buffers, I know it's been part of the discussion with the CPC, is what is that relationship between the two? It's not just the trail connections, it's not just the links between the two parcels, it's how the two relate. Where are the gardens and how do they relate to other gardens that may be in
So
the
I
other
guess
parcel of
that's
land?
really where I'm at. I'm looking at,
And
what's the big
we'll
picture?
find out more about that when we get the development proposals in. But at this point, what we can do is better define what we want to see on the parcels that we control now.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree, I understand where you're going. I guess I look at that thing and say, one should be developed in conjunction with the other, so that there's an overall view for not just this green blob, but for the entire thing.
The great thing about this plan is it's not cast in stone like any other master plan. It can be modified, and when we see what kind of development project we get before us,
No,
then we can
I
start to think
understand.
about how we
I like to,
modify
I'm a
this.
big picture person, and I'm only seeing part of it, and that troubles me, that's all. That's a comment.
Anything else, Court?
No.
Mike?
No, thank you, thank you.
Ed?
Yes, the issue that Courtney brought up was one I had in mind, so I was kind of planning to suggest that someone might want to explain to people who might not be familiar with it, just why the lines were drawn the way they were, because there's nothing really artificial about it. It's very specific and distinct, and that was what was brought to town meeting, and when we create a conservation restriction, which I think now is signed and sealed, and we're taking active 2/3 of the legislature to change it. But that's all pretty well sealed, so the purpose of this presentation tonight is to just talk about what was presented at town meeting as a roughly half of, 21 acres? It's about 10.5 or small change differences was for the conservation restriction, and that's what the state helped us to fund. So all of this was very, very carefully developed, and maybe somebody from CPC would like to comment on these product lines, or maybe Jessica, who spent an awful lot of time in the development stages of this project.
Hello, I'm Peter Clark. I'm chairman of the CPC, but we worked closely. Jessica was actually part of our planner when we divided the land, but she now is with the 300 committee. So Jessica, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Thanks. Just a little bit of the background on how this property came to be acquired by the town. The Spring Bars Road Subcommittee was formed after the Community Preservation Committee formed a group in town. They were charged by the Board of Selectmen to identify a property in Falmouth that would be ideally suited for mixed use, meaning affordable housing, recreation, and open space. Mixed uses within what was allowed with the Community Preservation Act. And the group actually spent up to a year. Barb Schneider was the chair at the time. We met with Historical Commission. We had a representative of the Board of Selectmen on the group, planning, and we looked at the map of Falmouth, and this property was timed perfectly in the sense that the seller was willing to sell. It had enough land for the type of, the number of units that the CPC was looking to recommend in town. So the purpose of recommending the acquisition to the town in this way was to, as Ed said, utilize the state grant, the $500,000 land grant, to purchase the property that we're now calling the conservation parcel. And the 300 committee, we hold the conservation restriction there. The lot lines are drawn like this, one, to protect as much of the frontage of the pond as possible, to protect the Atlantic cedar swamp and some of the buildable area. And the ultimate goal was to retain some buildable area so that there would be sufficient land when the time came that the CPC and the Board of Selectmen were ready to move forward with the RFP for the housing. So it is a funny lot configuration, but the whole idea from the beginning when this was proposed was to have all of the acreage to be able to use it for the purposes for which it was acquired. The open space, we think we've captured the valuable open space. There are resource areas clearly on the other parcel, and they'll have to be protected with setbacks and the like. But the idea was a holistic project that included housing, recreation, and open space. I hope that's helpful.
So these boundaries were drawn after the property was acquired. Rather, these weren't two pre-existing things that
Right.
just...
It was one 21-acre parcel, and we hired Mike McGrath to do a subdivision plan. And one of the properties was acquired with state assistance through conservation funds. They would only provide the conservation funding towards the parcel that was going to be permanently protected. So we had to actually do a subdivision so that the entire lot that was being purchased with the land grant funds would be protected. So part of it was leverage some of the community preservation funds to get the state grant funds, but these lots were created to facilitate the type of purchase that the town was looking to make.
And I'm not questioning that purpose at all. I mean, I think that's exactly appropriate. I guess I'm looking at this and thinking that, and I know there was a lot of thought by somebody that went into this, and probably like anything else, there were a lot of trade-offs that resulted in the lines being drawn, but it reminds me of something early in American history that was called a gerrymander. And that's what I see here, is it's not a logical, it doesn't appear, when I look at it, to be logical. It looks to me like it was a series of trade-offs in order to achieve some goals, which is fine. And case closed, I think I don't need to take up any more time in the meeting.
Okay. Ed?
Yeah, let me then, as you all, as members of CPC are aware, that I'm somewhat familiar with the project. I was pleased to see that the 4 examples you picked are also properties, even the one in Wellfleet, that I'm pretty familiar with, so I guess I fit the description of the kind of target person you might be trying to appeal to when you create these kinds of protected properties. I do visit them just because I'm interested. But I think everything that's been done is really an outstanding job. You all do know that if I had any issues, I have never been bashful about expressing them, even if they're contrary opinions. But I have none. I think you've pretty much captured all of the intents and objectives, and everything that had been talked about in the past is represented pretty well here. So I say nice job, and time to move on.
Tommy, do you have any?
Not at the moment, no, thank you.
I'm going to go back to you, Mike.
There is there is an east-west corridor right at the southern boundary that's delineated. And I don't want to get into everything, but what was the intent of setting that at being so close to the ocean, the pond and the wetlands and why was that carved out?
Access. Access.
Access
Grizzly Witten
to-
wasn't involved with any of the
Right.
conservation restriction or the land purchase. We came in later. But I
Access
understand it
to
was meant
what?
for the access. There are a number of.
To the water.
To Little Pond.
It provides to the housing parcel access to Little Pond. This is the only point where the housing parcel has access, physical access. It's not on town property.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
I saw someone had their hand raised. If you'd like to come up, please.
Barb Schneider, former CPC chair. And I just want to add, Courtney, obviously, the ideal situation would have been to make a nice straight line right up there. We were dealing with a situation where we had been advised that there's a fine line in number of units that makes an affordable housing situation interesting. We were on the cusp of it being not interesting. We had to leave as much land for building, and that is one of the more, I don't want to use the word damaged, it's certainly a well-used part of the property, that section that looks like the bite. One other thing I wanted to say, that we don't give credit to NSTAR, but I do want to give credit to NSTAR. They took a very narrow window of 2 days, and they came out and on their own, at our request, moved the osprey nest from a very poor location where it was going to be constantly harassed to putting it closer to the water. And I do want to thank them for that, because they did that, dropped everything to accommodate the fact that we were entering March and they would be returning and it would be too late to move that nest. So that's a relocation, and I just wanted to add that in. And I would hope that, you know, the other part is that we had to leave that one part going up to the road, because you need to have private access to the conservation parcel and not use the developed parcel as your access to it. And you had to forfeit some buildable property to have the state feel that we were worthy of the grant. I hope that helps with some pictures.
Thank you. Before I have somebody from the audience, which I will acknowledge in a moment, I wrote down a bunch of stuff, and if I don't ask, I'm going to forget. As you were doing the presentation, thank you for the layers. We had the benefit of these packets that were provided, and as she spoke and talked about it, it was very easy to fold one layer on top of the other. Very nice presentation. At the forefront, we will be looking for stewards for this property. This is on our great public TV. That's something that is a commendable activity done by many in this town. It's a great thing. The meadows, I'm partial to meadows as opposed to forested land for a number of reasons. I think that was good. The vistas, it's a good mix. I'm more, view 1 and view 3 are the ones that I'm more struck by as opposed to the second. Special sitting areas. If anyone has gone to Heritage Museum and Gardens over in Sandwich, they put in the new child development area. There's some really neat ways to have seating that is also, blends right into the area. And it's pretty bulletproof. You know, that's one of the things you always have a consideration for. There may be just a hint of something on some of that, one of the switchbacks that they did. Very creative with the tree fort, all that type of thing. The buffer to the west. We, on this board, I'm sure, any development, any activities to the western portion would definitely be a consideration by, I would almost guarantee anybody that develops that, recognizing that all the efforts here also benefited them and will in the future, and that's get that buffer first. You know, that's how I'm looking at it. The soils on any of the activities would have to be really reviewed. Any soil augmentation, just because we don't want to introduce, and I'm sure people are aware of it, we don't want to introduce bad stuff. The 10-6-5-3, very creative. I like that. You do need to have the, when somebody says a path, you think of a cart path, something very traditional. There's great ways to go with nature with it and also have it very functional, which you do need to have. You're introducing the public into an area, and there's always a concern of some misfortune. I think that loop, being creative on that, and the ADA, that's another little thing that I had on the bottom. This is all a balancing act. You know, you don't want to preclude anybody, but there's also the realization of just maybe, I can't, you know, but I think you've expanded it enough that there's an overwhelming activity area for anybody that has restrictions. I like the boardwalks being split up. Not sure of the length on the one going along the pond. The Cedar Swamp, I think, could be a really strong learning point for any of the younger children in this community, what that really is. It's surprising that it's survived its history. It's a testament to what Mother Nature can endure. The shelter. Told you I had a lot to ask. The shelter, something similar to the one at the bike path, not as grand as that, maybe very simplistic. I can see that being, again, introducing it, not quite sure as placement. Like I said, this is very fluid, very dynamic. This is not set in stone. This will always be something that will be coming up for discussion. Something that would be incorporated not only just for pleasure and rest, but also for education. Something, it's definitely open and constructed pretty bulletproof, you know, simple, better. Heavy timber, just, you know, things that are gonna endure. I think, and then just jumping back, I understand completely the division of this. Being in the construction trade and knowing the value point of what you need to build a home, I understand where they were going with it and where that balancing act is. And there was an awful lot of people, even more than what's in this room, that participated in that for a very long period of time. A lot of effort was given, and it was introduced at town meeting, and here it is. You know, this is all starting to come to fruition. We're very fortunate that we're able to do this. A lot of hard effort on this. And that's all I have. Now, I'm going to go back to the audience, to the gentleman that had his hand raised.
Thank you. Ron Zweig, Precinct 1. I'm also on the Water Quality Management Committee. And I just had a few questions through the chair, if you please.
Please.
One thing is, I'm sort of looking at the parcel from the viewpoint from the pond toward it and the pond's interests. And one thing is that one of the factors that we're dealing with in terms of the water quality, and as you are probably all aware, Little Pond is one of the more impaired estuaries in that part of town. And so that in the design of the site, you might also consider the runoff coming from those parking areas and this kind of thing in the big areas, and that in capturing that. And the Horsley-Witten Group actually has a lot of experience with this kind of thing. So you're really capturing a lot of that nitrogen that's coming off of different areas, and that this might be factored into the design of the conservation area to help better protect the pond from those areas. The other thing that I'd like to just have a question about is the access to the pond. There were two things that were mentioned in the presentation. One was access for the community that's there, and maybe similarly the kayak access. And I'm just wondering how that would work out for bringing the kayaks in or bringing other things in to that area, if that would be worked out in terms of the different widths that you have of these things, and maybe there's a way of bringing things in. There may be other activities in the pond that could thereby use that kind of access that would be well structured and designed. So those are those aspects as well. So basically, the runoff and the access for kayaks are maybe slightly larger vessels. No, it doesn't have to be a boat ramp.
I know what you're thinking.
Well, we're just looking in here a little bit, yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm stopping here, so just to mention that, okay, yes. Thanks.
Thank you. I do want to acknowledge that the runoff and any of the development on this has to be, they'll be coming back and with a certified plan, it's going to be a lot more. This is just an overview. I can tell you right now, there is no way that I would give any approval for anything other than a kayak. This is not meant to be that type of access. This is something that's a casual use. I'm under no way, shape, or form, if somebody had to come up that because of an emergency, that's all understandable. But to have this all of a sudden be another fishing site, that's not what this is intended for. This is intended for, from its inception, on a broader use by many peoples, on a lighter activity.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other comments from the audience? Any questions? Are there any others from the board?
So the board's comfortable, you don't have any more concerns or comments that the boardwalk, you had your comments regarding the boardwalk. I support the comments you made regarding the kayak launch. What's out there right now is not at all permitted by this board, and that's something the board will need to look at more thoroughly as far as access of that sort to the pond.
Right, because it's quite a distance to carry it from
Yes.
hither to yon. Please.
I just want to echo your concerns about defining that 50-foot buffer area. And I think it would help us probably to have our subcommittee work with Jen or somebody on the kind of language we could put into an RFP that would make clear to the developer that we have to be careful of that and find cooperative and constructive ways to treat that interface between the two.
I think, I appreciate you saying that, because I do, what I had said, it's a benefit to both. I truly believe that the buffer is going to help the developer as well as it would, and biasly, it would also help this project as well. So I do think, thank you for that opening of the door there.
And that, I believe that will be one of the recommendations that comes along with our plan, is to try and have this interface and this cooperative effort with any RFP that may come out, so that, there is a win-win situation for the development and the conservation piece. And that may address some of Mr. Bird's concerns earlier about seeing the big picture of, how these two parcels of land can work together and still preserve each individual intent. One of the questions I have for the commission, knowing that none of these elements or amenities or signage or anything is actually on the table before the Conservation Commission, we would like to gauge your opinions on whether or not some of these aspects would be permittable under the Wetlands Protection Act, under your local bylaw. We'd like to be able to incorporate some of those recommendations into our report. And if there's anything that is glaringly, something that the commission would never even consider approving, we'd like to be able to, not necessarily take that off the table, but keep our recommendations a little lower on that.
I can poll the board. I do not see anything that isn't permittable without its appropriate conditions.
Right, and conditions and mitigation.
I think that we could address, the only trigger that the garden area, it would be organic, it would be, that type of thing. The very obvious things for the activity on that, capturing any of the road runoff or the parking runoff, all the usual
performance
addressing of
standards.
things like that.
I think to ask us to give you the advice of the board as an entire thing tonight would be inappropriate. I think that as a board, we need to deliberate about the issues that you've raised and come to some kind of consensus and give you that kind of feedback, rather than for us to venture out opinions as individual members of the commission. Because then at some point down the road, if the commission members change, or the wind blows in a different direction, or the circumstances unfold with the entire parcel that are kind of different than what we perceive, all of a sudden, what we've given you guidance on no longer is relevant. Do you follow?
Right, no, and I appreciate that too.
So I think we need to drop back and cogitate on the thing for a while.
That might be a good point for me to jump in about the schedule and what we're trying to do at this point. Because this is a draft plan. We're going to go through a process with Horsley Witten and the subcommittee over the next month. In the middle of January, we will have a more definitive plan with prices associated with these elements of improvement on the air as well too. So we know what we're up against to try to accomplish this kind of plan. And during that time, we'll be working with Jen and Jessica and the rest of the CPC members that are part of this process to further refine what we've heard, bring it forward into the plan, and then bring it back to the public again back in January. So you'll have something that I think will probably address some of those issues that we're talking about tonight and what we've heard previously as well too by that time. Thank you.
This is just a preliminary. This is just an overview. This is not something we're permitting. This is just something that, these are the activities that they're suggesting they're going to investigate further. And I believe that there's nothing here that would warrant any strong concerns.
I think if the board wants to take some time and look at the packets that were the entire slideshow that they have provided, if any one of you, including those members that aren't here tonight, have any concerns regarding certain elements, you can contact me and I can relay those concerns to Horsley Witten. The one recommendation that I would make to this board is on this parcel and moving forward with the restoration of this parcel is try to maintain as much of the natural vegetation that's there. We do have some invasives, there are quite a few invasives on that site, but you do have some large standing trees that this board should look at protecting. They're already established, you don't want them removed for any reason other than to put a drop in. I understand that safety is a concern. time to review it more thoroughly and have concerns, just please let me know.
Does that give you enough guidance from us, or what are you looking from the board to?
I want you to follow Jen's suggestion. Your staff member is appropriately suggests that you are part of the process, and we're developing it over time. We have at least 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a little bit more than that, to actually come up with the final concept that's the master plan for the open space parcel, the conservation restricted parcel. So in the meantime, as you think of ideas that come forward in this process, bring them through Jen. She'll get them over to the subcommittee and Norris Whitten, and we can incorporate them and try to come up with what we think is going to be the best concept for the long-range plan. But thank you very much for your input tonight.
Ed?
Yeah, if I may, just add one thing. Anyone who does have any comments or suggestions, I think it'd be a good idea to try and forward them to Jen within the next 7 days or a maximum of 10 days, so that she can put it all together and forward it to the committee, because I know they want to be able to move on this thing.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your presentation. Next on the agenda, as the room clears a little bit, I'm going to discuss and vote a conservation restriction, Teledyne Instruments, Inc. I'm going to give them just a couple minutes to debug everything here. While we have a break in the action, has anyone read the minutes for 11/7/2012?
Oh, the minutes, yes. Mr. Chairman, I've looked at the minutes, and there are some minor corrections. They're substantially okay. Page 3, spelling correction, my name is spelled Bird, B-I-R-D, not B-I-R-D-E. That is end of first paragraph, top of page 3, where I move to accept staff's recommendation. Page 5, about a third of the way down, Jen Exner is discussing things, and on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, 6th line down, there's a sentence that begins, most of the vegetation has been historically managed. That should be, most of the vegetation has been managed historically. Okay, it's a question of emphasis. And then on page 8, about 3/5 of the way down, Mr. Schmidt, I share Courtney's views on this. The property owner isn't doing their half of their constructional agreement. I believe that Mr. Schmidt's intent was contractual agreement.
I'll take those, any.
And that's right. Other than that, I find them acceptable and move they be adopted with those changes.
Second.
To me.
We have a motion and a second to accept the minutes for 11/7/2012. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? So moved. Thank you. going back on track here, we're going to discuss and vote conservation restrictions for Teledyne Instruments, Inc. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ament Law Firm. With me tonight is Bob Ament, who's probably going to chime in at some point too. We're representing Teledyne Instruments, and Teledyne Instruments is seeking to have a conservation restriction placed on a portion of their property at 49 and 0 Edgerton Drive. Teledyne is in the process of permitting an expansion of their facilities and going in front of the Cape Cod Commission. Part of the conditions was a conservation restriction on his property. The proposed open space is highlighted here with the dots and can be seen here as well with the dashed line. So whichever is easier for you to see, I can give it a map. As I said, it's a condition of the Cape Cod Commission that this conservation restriction be placed on the property. They also required a NHESP restriction placed on the property, which has already been recorded with the Registry of Deeds. It is for 5.16 acres of a total 14.38 acre parcel of property. It is abutted to the north by Camp Edwards Railroad and to the south by an additional 4.56 acres of forested open space. A portion of that's been zoned for subdividing, but there will continue to be a forested area there, and that can be seen in this area down here to the south, and then by the railroad to the north, and then Route 28 lies to the east of the property. The conservation restriction we proposed is nearly identical to the conservation restriction that was placed on the Hui property late spring, early summer of this year. The town also took. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them.
Thank you. Jen?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I last spoke with Ament Law Firm regarding this conservation restriction. The only concern that the staff has is the work and maintenance involved in doing the annual reports, the baseline monitoring of the property, and who is going to conduct that monitoring. With the current staffing levels of the town, makes it very difficult for our department or your department to keep up with all the different CRs that the board is requested to hold. So I am currently speaking to the joint Ament and Clark regarding developing something with the property owner so that monitoring is assured for a certain period of time. We can't do it indefinitely, CRs are held indefinitely, but we need to work out that, we need to move forward on that discussion, and we need to check with the state if that would be allowed, before I recommend or agreeing to what we see on. So if you don't have any questions on the substance within the document, I just, as I said, need to explore the monitoring component of this a bit more before I can recommend it. And I would ask for a week or so.
Okay.
Continue the discussion next week. That's just my overall comment on this. Other than that, you should look at the document and provided that to you and see if there's anything in the reserved rights or leases or anything like that that this board would like to see corrected. So once we get the mitigation part of this set, we're not coming back to the document itself.
Okay. Anyone have any questions about the document and what has been presented as far as that? Not actually the process of holding the CR, but the information provided? Yes.
Yes, well, just yesterday, I did, as a matter of fact, spent about a half an hour just going through with a brief scan of all the materials that were provided and some of the attachments. I guess I was looking at the copy that I think was, didn't I see it online somewhere? Trying to remember, I've been doing a lot of things the last couple of days. But there's a tremendous amount of information here. And as I started going through it, I had the same thoughts that I'm pleased to be hearing from our administrator, so I'm not alone, because I started to think that when one agrees to hold a conservation restriction, it's a responsibility we have, and it's in some ways a liability that we have. There's a lot of work you're asking us to do here, and I spent a half hour and haven't begun to really get into a lot of the details on what you're presenting to us. And I'm just wondering, and I don't really think that I'm too anxious to vote to accept this conservation restriction. I'd encourage you to think about who else might be able to do that for you in the town. Maybe it's the town of Falmouth itself, or maybe it's the 300 committee, or I did think of the Department of Natural Resources. I say this because I don't think that so much of this would require a tremendous amount of staff time as well as the commissioners themselves. And I don't think I'm ready to commit the staff to all of this increased responsibilities. And you know, every one of these restrictions is a lot more work, and I happen to be aware that there's some restrictions we currently hold that nobody's actually gone out recently and taken a look at what's going on because the time isn't there. So I think it's a major question. I start wondering, is this some kind of, I would call it, maybe it's an unfunded mandate, we sometimes call these things. Cape Cod Commission, Mr. Ahmed, we see your hand, you'll have an opportunity. But the Cape Cod Commission wants to do all this work, and it's all very good. But they're sort of committing us to do an awful lot of work, and we don't have the resources. There's so much that's not being done now, and I think primarily an awful lot of violations that we don't have time to follow up on because staff just is too busy. And I just don't think we can do it without some increased manpower to handle the workload.
I think I can actually speak to your concern, Mr. Schmidt, because our client has agreed to fund the monitoring, and that's part of what we're discussing with Ms. McKay. And I think that will really go towards your what seems to be your overriding concern here, and how is this enforced, and who's keeping track of this. And our client has agreed to oversee that aspect of it, and that's exactly what we're in the process of working out right now.
That might be helpful, so we'll be interested in seeing what you come up with. But I'm thinking about, you know, this is an ongoing process. It's just not now. It's next year, and it's 10 years from now.
It would be,
It's
exactly.
a perpetual restriction on the property. And so you're committing one organization in town to do an awful lot of work on infinitum. And I have concerns about that.
Thank you, Ed. Tommy?
How is that conversation going with staff? I mean, you guys are making progress towards a third party of monitoring and...
We just started the conversation about the monitoring. They're aware of staff's concerns regarding that component of holding a CR. I've briefly discussed it with Attorney Ament, and we'll be having continued discussions in more detail regarding how that's going to be drafted.
And with some kind of annual report to you with status or something like that?
Correct.
Who's going to do that, and those are all the details we need to work out that I just don't have available for this board right now, but I hope to by next week or the latest the following week.
Okay.
Mike?
To be quite truthful, I haven't had time to review what was given to me, and I'm not sure what I got in front of me.
Okay. Courtney?
Following up on Ed's comment, first of all, I'll ask Ed through the chair, are there any specifics that you can cite of where these kinds of issues that you are talking about have occurred?
Well, I don't want to be specific at this moment. Yes, there are specifics, but I'd rather not mention them up. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But it's just a fact of life that there's just not all the time that we have that we'd like to be able to devote to some of these extra activities.
So you have, okay. Now, to follow up to the main point, your client is proposing to fund the monitoring of this, is that the point? On an ongoing position. So if Teledyne goes away, sells that property, does that become the funded issue for the buyer?
I think this is part
In
of.
other words, would that go with the property?
And that's a fair question. I think that's part of what we're dealing with Ms. McKay on at the moment.
I mean, I think
The
that,
discussions are, I mean, when we just started
If-
talking.
if I-
no, fine, and so, since you're just starting talking about it, I'm putting that issue on the table.
That's a great point to bring up.
I mean, because it only makes sense. I mean, we have orders and conditions that on-go with the deed, so,
Absolutely.
no other comments.
I'd like to
I think it's a good thing.
I'd like to thank my fellow commissioners on such productive comments, because I think it's necessary to get that out in front, for everybody to be able to know the concerns of the board. I look forward to the next week or so of information gathering, and I don't have, in my brief, not getting deep into it, there's nothing that jumps out other than, and the maintenance issue, the long-term, and that's being addressed. And I think that that is something that can be figured out. That's above my pay grade. Mr. Ahmed?
Thank you. As you know, I represent Teledyne with Mr. Clower. Let's not forget that in almost all cases, conservation restrictions are good things. They're required in numerous cases by our town bylaws. Throughout the zoning bylaw and the subdivision regulations, there are requirements for conservation restrictions. And they are nothing new. But the issue is somewhat new. I think the issue is somewhat new because there is more of an emphasis by the state in the monitoring process. The monitoring process is not a requirement by statute, and so over the years there have been conservation restrictions. Every conservation restriction imposed has not had these kinds of conditions, but they are now, and it's something we're concerned about. At the same time, as there are more and more conservation restrictions required by law, required by town bylaws, required by the Cape Cod Commission to do good things. This Teledyne project is a terrific project for the town of Falmouth, recommended by the selectmen and so on. It has to be done, and the building cannot be occupied unless the conservation restriction goes around. So we have to figure this out. And the statute provides for the town to hold conservation restrictions. So this is an appropriate role for government to play. So actually, aware of the town's concern about accepting conservation restrictions because of the monitoring costs, I proposed to Jen McKay that we would provide the monitoring, a requirement of the conservation restriction recorded at the Register of Deeds in perpetuity, that there be annual monitoring by qualified people. It can be described in who's going to do it, provided by the property owner, regardless of who the property owner is, because remember, the conservation restriction goes on the property. And it is, and there are many requirements in a conservation restriction, including the one that we've drafted. If the bounds get broken that have to be set, it is the responsibility of the property owner to replace them. And there are various other requirements that are set for it. These are conditions. How are they enforced? Well, they can be enforced by court action, but there are costs involved in doing that, I suppose, but that can be provided for in a document. So we can work out language that is intended to be and would be in perpetuity that's a requirement of the property owner, who in this case is benefiting and still owns, we're not putting a conservation restriction on the entire property, and the rest of the property is worth, with the buildings on it, many, many millions of dollars. This is, so I think as far as in the future as we can think of, this is a situation where we can count on the monitoring being done by a responsible owner, and we will work on the language. We will make sure that the language we're going to add to this form. Now, the form that I've submitted to you has been approved we mentioned the Hui case, it's the same form, by the state. We're going to be adding language to it that includes this kind of monitoring provision, so it will become something new. We'll make sure the state is satisfied with it. We'll come back to the town with a revised document that includes this protection for the town, assistance with a government task, that it's appropriate government task, and provisions that will be paid for by our property owner. I'm confident it will work out, but I would say it must work out. We have to be able to solve this. We have to be able to put conservation restrictions on properties, and we most certainly have to put one on this property because we have a condition. We can't occupy a building that's under construction or for 100 people to work in unless we get this done in the spring. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Go ahead, Ed?
would like to add something, just to give some perspective on how I came to my comments here. When I looked at the project yesterday, I realized that I don't believe there are any wetlands on the property or close to the property. And that got me to thinking that most of our emphasis of our responsibilities here and the whole reasons the Conservation Commission was formed originally was to implement the Wetlands Protection Act of the state of Massachusetts. Now, over the years, we've also picked up responsibilities for land management in the town. And also remembering about 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a presentation by a former chairman of this commission to the town of Falmouth suggesting that we needed some additional staff and specifically to hire someone or pay someone to focus on land management and that part of the job of the Conservation Commission, because even that long time ago, the burden was there. But, I'm glad to hear the work that Mr. Ahmed is talking about. But again, I do have some reservations, and I certainly support the project. It's good for the town. It will happen. But the only question, I think, is who should be holding the conservation restriction? I don't think it's necessarily required that Conservation Commission hold it. There are other options for the town, and I'm just asking that those other options be considered and explored.
Thank you. Mike, did you have a comment?
I'm looking forward to seeing it happen.
Courtney, all set? Jen, is there anything?
I'll continue my discussions. Been working with Ahmed law firm, and we'll get this done.
Okay, so after this presentation, we're just going to see you?
We'll continue the discussion to next week, and hopefully we'll have an answer by then for the board. You can make a determination. In the meantime, please read the document if you have any questions or concerns with any of the language specific, as I said, in the reserve rights. Please let me know sooner rather than later so they can incorporate any changes.
I do think actually, Jen, that given that we're going to want to have a response from the state, even 2 weeks, I mean, this, you can continue this discussion, and we'll obviously let you know when we're ready to have it come back, but it certainly won't be in a week. I can't imagine that it would be.
Okay, I was just trying to
No, I appreciate
move
that.
this along for
Yeah, thank you.
Why don't we say the 19th, and we'll see if we have some language by then.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for the
The
present.
19th of December, so.
Okay. Do we need to have a motion on that, or is that just something that's going to
We'll
happen?
just continue to the 19th.
Can I have a motion?
Move to continue this consideration of this conservation restriction until December 19th.
Thank you very much.
Second. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? So moved. And I have every confidence that there is a positive outcome on this. Next on the agenda, request to continue under determination of applicability. Gansett trustees, Gansett Road, Woods Hole, Mass.
I'm going to recuse myself.
We don't have to, we're just going to be continuing it.
Recuse yourself, they are requesting a continuance until December 19th.
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Any comments from the board? Any from the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous, so moved. A request for a continuance under a notice of intent, James and Christine Blue, 20 Eldridge Drive, North Falmouth, Mass.
Yes,
And-
Mr. Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until 12/12, December 12th.
December 12th.
So moved.
Second?
Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the audience? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous? So moved. We voted the minutes. Now we're jumping right into request for determination of applicability. First on the agenda is John and Susan Creed, 159 Chester Street, North Falmouth, Mass, for permission to remove a man-made landscape structures, permit a fire pit and walk, and to install native shrubs.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is to help somebody gain compliance for the sale of the property. So at this point, the project, with the representatives, reviewed the site, and we're comfortable recommending a negative 2 on the state and bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So
There's
moved.
a caveat that if it's not done as the staff has instructed and allowing you to do the work under an RDA, that they would need final minutes. So we'll see.
Okay, I'll move to accept staff's recommendation with the caveat.
Second?
Yeah, just a question, and does that caveat have a date certain attached to it? Or there's
I'm
some
sure
work to be
Mark
done?
has
I'd like to see it
discussed
done
at
before the
the-
property changes hands,
Yep, I'm sure.
so that a new owner doesn't get saddled with a responsibility.
I understand that. We always put a date certain.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? Any from the audience? Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous, so moved. And now we're going into the request for hearing under a notice of intent. All hearings of the Falmouth Conservation Commission are held simultaneously under the authorities of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw. Although a single decision of the commission is issued, it represents a separate decision under each authority. First one has been continued, and so we're going to go right to Charlotte Bell, care of 147 Fay Road Nominee Trust, 147 Fay Road, Woods Hole, Mass, for permission to remove existing lawn, remove, maintain, and control invasive plant species, install restoration trees and shrubs under the expired DEP number 252077 to selective prune, vista prune, and associated clearing, excavating, and landscaping.
Hi.
Good evening.
As you know, but for your record, I'm Bob Ament, and I'm an attorney in Falmouth, and I represent Charlotte Bell, who as a trustee recently bought this property on Fay Road. And I represent, as I said, this buyer of the property. And in the course of our due diligence in preparation for her purchase, we determined that there were several outstanding orders of conditions, or order conditions and amendments, that for which there was no certificate of compliance. And when we investigated further, we found that the conditions on the ground were not as they were supposed to be. that there was somewhat more lawn and there were somewhat fewer plants. And so when the property was purchased, it was on a condition that the seller would continue efforts to bring the property into compliance. Now, the Conservation Commission was very helpful a few weeks ago in allowing, through a request for a determination of applicability, plants to be planted that had to be planted in order to be in compliance. And there wasn't time during the planting season to do that if we had done an order of, gotten an order of conditions to do that work. So that was really very helpful, but a condition of the RDA, which allowed certain planting, was that we come back for an order of conditions so that, for instance, monitoring provisions can be imposed. So that is the background for the work. Some lawn was removed, some plants which were supposed to be there were planted. The owner wants to be able to remove some invasives. That's, I believe, additional work. And there's also a request for vista pruning, and that work would be done under the supervision of the staff. Our hope with the planting that's been done to comply with the recent RDA and this order of conditions will allow the 1996 expired order of conditions to get a certificate of compliance for that. Then we'll have this new order, which you'd be voting today. Dan Celine is the landscape architect for the project, and he's here to describe the work that's been done, the work that we've gotten done under the RDA.
Hi, my name's Dan Celine. I'm the landscape architect. Shortly after the RDA hearing, Jeff Johnson from Homes of Grath and I met with Jennifer and Mark in the hearing room downstairs and developed a sketch of the restoration plantings, to be installed. We then develop a drafted plan, which you see here. Sort of look back with Mark and Jennifer to get their approval with the plan and the approval to begin the installation. So the plan is relatively simple. What you see here is the area of the lawn. Along the way, Mark requested that an area of invasive plants that was outside of the lawn area be included in the restoration area in that location. The plants, include, sheep, laurels, up at the top, sweet fern, bayberry, sort of the olive here, arrowwood viburnum, and two tupelo trees. Very, very sort of typical mixture of native plants for this woodland edge. I'd like to share some photographs with you of the finished work.
Thank you.
Doing it.
So the photographs are a little bit underwhelming when they're taken, when the plants are dormant. But I think the most important thing to note here is no lawn in any of these pictures, and a lot of native plants that will do well and grow into, I think, a very full mass to cover this hillside area. I think that's really it for the presentation of the planting plan. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Jen?
No question, Mr. Chairman, the other comment I would make is that, when we condition this, we do put a monitoring component on it. Other than that, came up with the plan, decided to put in, the board allowed that to happen. Requires a file with notice, and then it comes up.
Thank you.
So it's good, we followed through. Very nice to see.
Courtney?
No question.
Mike?
Looks like a step in the right direction. Like it.
My feelings are the same. This is a good example of the way I like to see the process work, everybody cooperating together. Thank you.
Tommy?
Looks like it's all there to me.
If everybody has enough information, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Second.
Okay, seeing any other comments from the board? Any from the audience? Seeing none? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous, so moved. Now moving on, thank you, gentlemen. Now moving on to continued request for a hearing under notice of intent. We have 9 Weber, 50 and 60 Associates Road, West Falmouth, Mass, for permission to replace approximately 133 linear feet of existing vertical stone and concrete seawall with a sloped riprap seawall, deposit 30 cubic yards of sand to create an access ramp, install mats for protection, native plantings at the top of the seawall and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscape.
Good evening.
Good
For the
evening.
record, Barbara Frappio with Warwick and Associates. This was continued. You were all here at the first hearing, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time going over the whole project. The one change you asked us to make is to reduce the height of the wall so that the replacement wall would be no higher than the existing wall, and we have done that. So we made the change you requested. We've also have removed from the filing the plantings at the top of the coastal bank, in as much as we're not removing vegetation on the face of the bank. There's no mitigation that's going to be required. So I believe the plan addresses your concerns and your angst from the last meeting. And if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Jen? Questions? Courtney?
I have no questions. You've addressed our concerns.
Mike?
The, most of the erosion or chipping of the wall is the west end more than the east end. Is that something to do with the way the wall was constructed, or is that something to do with the way the storms approach, or?
Probably a combination,
Okay.
and also the root systems that are behind the, a lot of things contribute to it.
That's it. I'm good.
Okay. Ed?
Can I just pass for a moment?
Certainly.
I'm looking for something.
Tommy? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, during construction,
Sure.
Barbara says she removed the plantings. If there is some disturbance with that, you are going to, you have to cut into that bank. You don't think you're gonna have to disturb maybe the lower layer of that shrub to put that in?
Right behind the wall, that
Yeah.
bank needs some planting. It was just, we had done some,
No, I know you had done it up there. I'm just wondering, how much disturbance do you think it's gonna require to lay that wall back like the commission asked you to?
not much.
Okay.
I mean, there's,
Well, I'm asking you
for,
to
and
work
at the
on
west side, as we know, it's eroded anyway.
Yeah,
On the east end, very little.
okay. Nothing, we can't just plant back
Yeah.
and stabilize that, but if you don't want that area to be bare appropriate action to come up and
Right.
come back, so.
That's gonna overgrow.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure that, how much disturbance there would be.
You can expect the vegetation to actually grow down over the wall in no time. It usually does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Ed?
I was trying to look through the regulations here on 10.38, which I had done a week ago, and I can't find the section. But an issue had come up about what's being proposed here is a little bit of a different type of structure that existed previously. And I had looked through the regulations when that issue came up. Actually, I started looking at the meeting last week, and then I looked some more when I got home. And I did find a section, but I can't find it right now, that does allow for improving existing structure, and does not require that it be reconstructed in exactly the same fashion, particularly in cases where we now know that there might be a better way to do it. And that's what I see before us, and that's why I feel inclined to approve and move forward with what's been proposed, particularly with the height of the wall there being reduced as we had requested.
Good. And if you find that section again, feel free to email it to me. I might need it down the road.
It's in the section here that it's velocity zone. I
Okay.
forget the exact wording, but it's in there.
Okay.
If the board has enough information, I would entertain a motion.
Move to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Second.
Any comments from the audience? Any others from the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous, so moved.
Thank you. And could I just follow up with something that you talked about earlier in the night about staffing? Perhaps if all these conservation restrictions and monitoring programs that you are putting into place all contributed to a fund, you could get back to Jeremiah. That would help with the compliances and the monitoring and everything. And maybe there could be some way to set up a fund that these monitoring programs would put the money into to support having a staff person that could handle this overload. It would help people like me.
Yeah, when Barbara says Jeremiah, she's referring to a person we used to have on staff. So we lost part of our staff a couple of years ago to budgetary constraints.
Barbara, we would love to have you advocate in a town meeting for increased funding for the Conservation Commission, so we can add back staff to deal with these
do that in a
issues,
heartbeat.
so that our job can be more efficient and we can better serve the public.
I would do that. Just
Thank you.
ask me.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Jen, is there any other,
Nope, those will be done next week, and there will be another issue under other business next week,
Okay.
but we'll tackle that then.
does anybody have anything else to be discussed? I would entertain a motion.
I move to adjourn.
Wow.
I'll take that as a second.
Wow. You think that's a second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Unanimous, so moved.
Yeah, longer.